The history of this world began long before it was discovered by the Imperium. And if the archives do not lie, then the colonists are descendants of the crew of one of the first Mechanicum Ark ships. As it is known from history, the first attempts to jump into the warp were undertaken by the Martian tech priests without the use of astropaths, for by that time they had perished, and a new inflow of recruits from the navigator houses was provided only after the alliance with Terra was concluded, so each Ark ship embarked on a suicidal expedition without hope of returning. Moving blindly, they fell into the unpredictable currents of the great ocean, whose waves twisted the hull and deformed the warp engines, forcing the crew to escape into real space, and they complied. By the will of fate or pure chance, they ended up among distant, unexplored stars, where they subsequently found a new home. Such a fate also befell the world that remained in history under the moniker Shining Giant of the Ultima Segmentum. The date of this world's discovery is unknown, but a number of facts suggest it happened in the early stages of the Great Crusade. Reconnaissance barges of the 1159th Expeditionary Fleet discovered a planet in the Haradon sector of the Ultima Segmentum, whose surface was completely covered in metal. An ambitious and hot-headed commander, whose name has not been preserved, hastily deployed the fleet to attack the celestial body. When the wave of attacking barges was swept away by defensive weaponry, tech priests attached to the fleet identified similarities between the enemy ships and the standard template constructs accepted in the Imperium. Soon, the fire ceased. Communication channels were established and negotiations began. Subsequent high-level diplomatic meetings revealed that the metallic sphere was far from Xenos in origin, and on the contrary, owed its transformation to a millennia-long labor of Magos, who deliberately eradicated all organic life to work in the glory of the Omnicia under conditions of blessed sterility. After negotiations, the Forge pledged loyalty to Mars and was entered into the Imperial annals under the name Metalica. Over time, they gradually distanced themselves from Mars's influence, but the hammer and clenched fist on the world's emblem remained red in recognition of their kinship with the Red Planet. The white garments of Metalica's warriors, to this day, reflect the sterile perfection of their lifeless world and the blessed purity of machines. To complement the subdued white color, the Metalicans use red to highlight the cog trim on the robes of electro-priests or to apply distinguishing marks on the hulls of cataphrons and castellans. Scarlet masks, which accentuate the plain colors of the symbols, serve as a reminder that Metalica is part of the history of the whole Adeptus Mechanicus. But rumors circulate that Metalican priesthoods paint their combat robots red to pay respect to the blood spilled in battles. Vanguard Tharivan Rangers don metallic armor and white cloaks with a red lining. Sicarian units typically wear white armor and have abandoned red altogether. All Skitari feature augmetics of a grey metallic color, made from the same alloy that coats the surface of the Forge world. The planet is almost entirely metal. No rocky crust covers the dull silver of its surface. No flora or fauna inhabit it. Even its atmosphere is hostile to any organic life. The only exception is the legions of the cult Mechanicus, who purposefully cleanse the planet so that their work can continue in blessed sterility. It was not always like this. However, techno-priests are inherently jealous of their treasures, and their Skitarii strive to eliminate all other species so that their quest for knowledge can proceed with maximum efficiency. Thus, Metalica became a world of hissing pistons, blazing forges, and layers of industrial waste. And yet it is far from barren, for with each new dawn, hundreds of mechanical beasts are set in motion by internal engines and march in steady ranks out of the furnace complexes. Another characteristic of the planet is the continuous sonic barrage from the operation of hundreds of compounds, factories and manufactorums, which emanates from the summits of its metallic mountains. It is at once deafening and inspiring. All weapons and machinery produced by Metalica can be easily identified by their distinctive roaring sound. They are crafted so that enemies can hear and feel the power of the followers of Omnicia before their demise. The Archives of Terror also contain a record of the Titan maniples based on the planet. These were Legio Metalica, which received the unofficial moniker Iron Skulls. Strange records recount the long service of the Legio, describing numerous victories and great hardships faced by the world and its defenders. One of its significant victories includes the repelling and merciless defeat of the armies of 32 separate invasions by various xenospecies that besieged Metalica at different periods in history. By the time the world was discovered by the Imperium, nearly a dozen nearby systems were part of Metalica's domain, thanks to the Iron Skulls. After the incorporation of the Forge world, the full might of Legio Metalica was unleashed upon the galaxy. The Iron Skulls earned respect, and their number of victories grew each year. Particularly notable conquests in the early years and during their participation in the Great Crusade include the conflict on Jardin Gris, where they fought side by side with the Primarch Guilliman. They also shattered the fortresses of the Archaists, chains of fortress worlds occupied by a divergent branch of humanity, overseen by an enormous, disgusting intellect. These victories solidified the reputation of Legio Metalica, and soon dozens of expeditionary fleets across the galaxy sought their assistance. Later, they forged an alliance with the Knights of House Raven. In the legends of the planet Colossi, it is said that when the mages entered the vaults of the house, upon seeing the immense number of dilapidated knights, they felt such deep sorrow that the slumbering knights awoke. At that moment, a strong bond was established between them, and House Raven swore loyalty to Metalica. In war, Legio Metalica favours orderly tactical doctrines, while the display of impulsive behaviour by allies greatly distresses them. Among the unusual methods of warfare was the strategic use of a special diplomatic corps, whose role was to interact with the command structures of allied forces. After achieving mutual understanding, these strategists advocated for battle plans approved by Legio Metalica, tirelessly working on the study of warfare methods. If circumstances forced the use of such methods instead of the usual doctrine, the Iron Skull strategies supported the changes in plans and sent reports to the home Forge world. Subsequently, these reports were disseminated among all members of Legio Metalica. This endeavour was aimed at developing and perfecting tactical acuity in their endless quest for improving their own methods of warfare. It is worth noting that the actions of these strategic diplomats caused much debate, both among other legions and within the ranks of the Iron Skulls themselves. To the former, Legio Metalica's methods seemed like a way to steal others' secrets and use the acquired knowledge at their discretion. To the latter, it was disappointing that Legio Metalica was unwilling to share the gained tactical developments, even if Allied commanders had proven themselves competent enough. By the time of the Ulanor triumph, the power of Legio Metalica was considerable. Later, during the Horus Heresy, emissaries of the Warmaster tried to sway the Forge world to the Warmaster's side, desiring to obtain a fraction of Metalica's power. The fate of these envoys remains unknown, for there is no evidence that they even reached the borders of the Forge. Nevertheless, in the early years of the heresy, Metalica's loyalty was repeatedly questioned. The most resonant case is related to the conflict between Legio Metalica and Legio Pallidus Mor, during which the latter reported the betrayal of Metalica's legion. According to the few princeps who survived the conflict, the Iron Skull battle group attempted to sway them into betraying the Emperor. Legio Pallidus Mor rejected this proposal, and the Iron Skulls responded to the refusal with violence. From that day, the Pale Reapers harboured extreme distrust towards Legio Metalica, and this arrangement did not change even after the truth about the corruption of the wayward princeps of the Iron Skulls due to the machinations of Legio Vulturum was revealed. Subsequent scattered reports of treacherous Iron Skull battle groups were received from other corners of the galaxy as well. Consequently, loyal forces of the Legio set the task to exterminate such traitors. Due to the tarnished reputation, the organization of diplomatic negotiations met its demise, as allies ceased to trust the Iron Skulls and stopped sharing their strategic secrets. However, even after the Horus heresy, the malevolent nature of the Forge still reasserted itself in some parts of the galaxy, where they continued to propagate the idea of purification from organic life. They went so far that in the year 923 of the 39th millennium, the congregation of Corpuscari was executed by the uncompromising Fulgurites on Mars. The Corpuscari believed that pilgrims from Metalica would bring their ideas and disrupt the sacred balance on the Red Planet. The ensuing civil war raged for several hundred standard years, and since then, the planet has become a haven for the militant electro-priests of both factions. Everything ended only when the demon Primarch Angron invaded Armageddon. This forced the electro-priests of the warring factions to unite. According to the archives of the Forge, the chief executor of the Metalican doctrine is considered to be Magos Dominus Asmergad Efal, a renowned tech priest whose mind was touched by both madness and genius. Bits of biological matter lie thick upon him, and no matter how hard he tries to erase them from the face of the earth, they still settle. Even a few rotting pieces of flesh that remain in Fal's body cause him revulsion and are regarded by him as an offence to the perfection of the Omnicia and an obstacle to his research. However, the fact that he must endure such weakness only strengthens the Magos' resolve to attain the purity he seeks. Rising through the ranks of Metalican tech priesthood, he mastered many of the most complex techno-religious rituals and scientific disciplines early in his career. Long-wave dissonance rays, luminescent replication cauldrons, and the plasma chalice of slaves, all were revealed to him through the teachings of the machine god. As time went on and Efal replaced more and more parts of his body with cybernetic implants, the first worms of disappointment gnawed their way into the remnants of his organic brain. Everywhere his gaze fell, he recognized clusters of withering flesh, even within his own creations. Servitors were imperfect beings due to their desiccated shells, while worlds beyond Metalica literally drowned in paradises of living organisms. Fal became an expert in the study of all living creatures. He sought to understand how to annihilate them. The largest specimens of tyrannids, thick-skulled orc war bosses, primitive void worms, and unicellular organisms all perished under the pressure of his powerful intellect. However, Magos Dominus was not a mindless butcher, for all obtained samples of living matter were meticulously studied and catalogued before their absolute destruction. Asmergad Fal believed that if he could understand why the Omnissiah allows the existence of such despicable matter, he would glimpse the divine plan which he so earnestly sought. He also did not cease his attempts to create the perfect machine in order to honor the Omnissiah. The results of his ill-fated experiments still wander through the abandoned warehouses of the Forge world. His energy spiders, created to cleanse machine spirits and devour rust, servitor hounds continue to plague the inhabitants of Metalica, although their creator has long forgotten about them. In his expansionist activities, FAL directed the strikes of his cohorts with surgical precision, depleting organic life in such a way that the biospheres of planets were destroyed. The life turning against itself fully satisfied the demands of the Magos. Deprived of vital elements of the ecosystem, entire biological species went extinct, and green forests turned into rotting deserts of wood and radioactive fallout. Fal visited many planets, and his touch set them on a path of ecological self-destruction. Slowly but surely, the tech priest altered the galaxy, giving it a more agreeable appearance. Despite Fal's remarkable expertise and genius, his actions met with resistance, as ancient warnings surfaced during the Age of Strife and the Ecclusiad War. His comrades feared that the Magos might fall into heresy, but Fal was given an opportunity to prove himself once more when the expansionist elements of Metalica decided to revive long-abandoned Adeptus Mechanicus facilities on neighboring planets. Fal seized the opportunity and, leading a vast army in the void, began the systematic restoration of worlds. The first planets were easily conquered, as they were inhabited only by scattered tribes of humans or orcs clans. Fal's army descended upon them with methodical vengeance of the Omnisia's servants. Clumsy Castellan robots, units of cataphrons, combat servitors, and ranks of electro-priests marched before the Magos, and their relentless advance crushed any resistance with an avalanche of snapping, buzzing steel. Once the enemies were annihilated, FAL employed massive radium bombs, saturating the planet with deadly radiation. In some places where life stubbornly refused to submit to FAL, he constructed gigantic neutron furnaces. They blazed with black fire and consumed the atmosphere until only cold, poisonous winds remained. But despite early successes, the cohorts of the Magos soon encountered more formidable resistance. Vortex 12 had long been a world where the technology of cryptostasis was tested. Its gas-choked continents floated over the cracked stone core, slowly slipping through time. Despite the hostility of the shattered temporal environment, life had firmly taken root on the Sky Islands and rusting remains of Adeptus Mechanicus bastions. The first forces that FAL sent to Vortex were subjected to a sudden and brutal attack. Entire maniples were annihilated within seconds of landing. Assuming that perhaps some of the ancient guardians of Adeptus Mechanicus were still functioning, the Magos studied the received information. What he discovered both baffled and excited him. Due to the caprices of time distortion, it turned out that this world had already been colonized by the Metalicans as a result of their own mission, but in the future. However, the conclave of the tech priests rejected FAL's offer to witness the cleansing of the planet from life. The Magos' response was swift, brutal, and merciless. Though the Magos and Vortex resisted with all their might, ultimately they were powerless, for FAL was deliberately inflicting as much damage as possible. In the end, despite desperate pleas, the tech priest launched a cyclonic torpedo into the planet's unstable core, dissipating its chronostasis field and causing a catastrophic explosion. The planet was annihilated as it had become an obstacle in the path to perfection. On Nightlag Prime, he destroyed the life-giving solar batteries, plunging the planet into eternal night and killing 97% of the population. On San Vol, the forces of the Adeptus Auroritas had been holding out in the ruins of their cathedral against the raids of Chaos forces for several months. The arrival of FAL and his forces gave them hope to break the defense, but midway through the battle, FAL realized that the soil of San Vol contained a troubling form of silicoid life, which would be almost impossible to eradicate. Abandoning his allies to their fate, the Magos continued his crusade. FAL also managed to come into conflict with the Knights of House Raven, for they did not approve of his methods. Thrice he accepted their help, but each time they were horrified to see the Metalican poisoning planets. Only ancient oaths restrained the noble house from attacking his cohorts. One of the knights ultimately renounced his heraldic symbols and liveries of House Raven in an attempt to stop FAL. His fate remains unknown. In the end, the Fabricator General of Metalica proclaimed that if Asmagard FAL ever turned his attention to Imperial worlds again, he would have to be restrained. But this did not happen, as FAL headed deeper into the Orcish Empire of Charadon, and the Metalicans breathed a sigh of relief at the thought that the problem might be eliminated by the Xenos. In the year 444 of the 41st millennium, an army of heretics of unimaginable size appeared in the skies above the hive world of Armageddon. Its ranks swarmed with Chaos Space Marines and demons. At its head was the demon Primarch Angron, altered from centuries of dwelling in the warp and filled with a bottomless hatred for the Imperium. The armies of mankind responded swiftly, as Armageddon was a crucial world for the entire surrounding sector. Alongside the regiments of the Astra Militarum and the chapters of the Adeptus Astartes, the Armageddon regiments and the Metalicans made their presence known. Formed from 12 maniples, the Escarnaclades were several macroclades, united by ancient oaths of loyalty. Almost since the founding of Metalica, they had fought side by side with the Armageddon armies. The Skitarii hurried to the war-torn planet to honor this ancient pact. When the larger forces of the Imperium, under the skilled leadership of Logan Grimnar, established a defensive line along the Heron River, the Escarnaclades ventured into the equatorial jungles to slow the enemy's advance. Two forces met in the uneven forested ravine between two jagged cliffs. On one side, a legion of metallic warriors, and on the other, the juridical forces of the Chaos Lord Gortorox. Soon, an intense battle ensued, as the warriors of Khorne charged into the lines of machines, destroying everything in their path with massive blades. But this was merely a deceitful maneuver designed to lure Garterox to his inevitable doom, for thousands of Skitarii turned as one and pounced upon the Chaos Lord. At a silent command, hundreds of energy carbines and rifles unleashed a torrent of fire upon him. In a fit of rage, the Chaos Lord stormed through the flames, his armor torn by explosions and his body scorched by plasma. With practiced ease, the ranks of Skitarii parted and rustily lunged forward. Dozens of electroshock weapons found their mark, and with a final blood-curdling scream, Garterox fell to the smouldering ground. With the destruction of the Chaos Lord, the spearhead of Grona blunted, and though his army was far from defeated, precious time was won for the ultimate successful defense of Armageddon against the war host of the Blood God. However, the wars of Armageddon were not the only trouble, for after the emergence of the Great Rift, the Caradon sector was assigned a very important role. It became a gateway to the larger Imperium Sanctus and a stronghold of the Adeptus Mechanicus priests' authority. Notably, it is situated within an arm's reach of one of the few stable channels traversing the raging warp storms of the Great Rift. Moreover, it is here that an enormous quantity of resource-rich worlds, ore-bearing asteroid belts and agri-worlds capable of feeding and supplying the entire sector are concentrated. For many centuries, Caradon has been beset with numerous misfortunes. Only in the last few centuries, its subsectors of Palan and Anungul have been nearly overrun by a vast orc empire. The probing tendrils of the Tyrannid Hive Fleet Leviathan have broken through the galactic plane in almost every subsector of the region, but, fortunately, in all instances, were driven back into the outer darkness. Only recently, the subsectors of Sifos and Palan witnessed a new Xenos invasion. This time it was the dreadful Necrons of the Sautek dynasty. Despite the errors of the past and all associated contradictions with the metallic forces, the Forge has become a bastion of resistance to all threats. Cohorts of Skitarii and maniples of Titans emerged from the Bolis subsector to crush the enemies of humanity again and again, and they fought not alone. With them were the renowned Knights of House Raven, the valiant Space Marines of various chapters, as well as fleets of the Sisters of Battle and Astra Militarum. All of them made tremendous efforts to transform the region into an impregnable fortress. According to Imperial chronicles, the domains of the Metalica and Mechanicum had significantly solidified by the onset of those fateful events, and the entire region had already been fairly thoroughly explored. For instance, the Bolis subsector, where the Forge world Metalica was located, served as the nexus of 3 stable warp routes, and the star system itself was a conglomeration of highly productive worlds. The armoured asteroid stronghold Ferrovigilum played the role of an astropathic relay station, while the Void Dock served as a staging point for the Caradon battle fleet. The commander of these forces, Lieutenant Geraldus Slichua Sheridan, compared the defence to a steel ring placed within another ring. She called this system impregnable, and the tech priests themselves, reclusive, loquacious pseudo-Javithans who, despite this, clearly understood how to fortify this place. The outermost steel ring of Metalica was formed by the 3 star systems Radiore, Brisantia, and Phiro. They were collectively known as the Metallican Gates. This system contributed to the development of the region through the labour of Hive Worlds and Turan, each boasting deep-water observation stations and numerous space fortifications. Each world also possessed superweapons of Metallican manufacture, with a trans-atmospheric range. These guns were capable of bombarding attacking ships as soon as they appeared at the system's borders. The theory was simple and exceptionally effective. An invader could not attack Metalica without passing through one of its gates. The Lirac subsector was drastically different from Abelis, as it was a locus of feral worlds. Despite a significant share of recoverable ores, gases, and other easily accessible and valuable substances, the planets resisted civilization and settlement. Some presented a harsh wilderness, whose high mountains and grim cliffs were fractured by constant tectonic activity. Others were home to sinister species of Xenos, rife with supernatural traits. Humanity, of course, exploited and settled these systems, but with the greatest difficulty. As for Metalica itself, it is worth noting that changes affected them first, after the discovery of the Great Rift. With the appearance of this anomaly, Fabricator General Clang issued an edict according to which his dominion transitioned to Metalican chronometry. According to the new decree, time was measured by the number of labor rotation cycles that had elapsed since the emergence of the Cicatrix Maledictum. This was the first but not the last rationalizing decree, though it nearly provoked civil war on several worlds. However, after the retreat of the horrors of the Great Night, a new calamity followed in the wake of the era Indomitus. Massive crowds of the followers of the ruinous powers brought death to the Caradon sector, and the War of Slime and Rust began. It all started with a series of ill omens. For instance, on Goliathia in the Alumac system, a prophet emerged among itinerant workers. His raving was cut short by the enforcers, but not before he managed to lead several hundred followers to a bloody execution. Superstitious panic gripped High Victorian at the edge of Darok after the Central District water reserves filled with foul, coagulated blood. In the Emboro system, a deviant religious cult named Those Who Hear the Whisper arose. They were annihilated by local mining clans before imperial authorities could intervene. On Fathom, in the Feria system, the ocean depths sparkled with a strange glow. The birth of mutants and cases of spontaneous psychic phenomena sharply increased throughout the entire region, concentrating among the densely populated systems of the Abylis submarine. Anxiety and religious fanaticism grew with each passing day. The industrial world of Ferric in the Ferior system experienced an outbreak of bubonic plague, which turned living flesh to rancid jelly and swelled the internal organs of the inhabitants until they burst. In the underground hives of St. Espin's Gift in Radiore, thousands of the plague-dead rose again. Whole battalions perished, fighting the plague-stricken corpses of workers from corpse starch factories. Even the cardinal world of Alexistor did not remain sacred, for an epidemic of sorcerous madness struck the pilgrim shantytowns, and maddened crowds besieged the holy sites of the planet. Meanwhile, supernatural manifestations cascaded through the Nakabolta astropathic relay in the Gildrus system, forcing the Space Marines to deploy strike forces against the Cursed Moon to the detriment of the sector's overall defense. For the rulers of Metalica, the cause of all this was clear: the spread of organic life. An excerpt from the tech sermon of dogmatic Gwivadin Omar clearly demonstrated the fervency of these convictions. Make no mistakes in your deliberations, brothers. It is an absolute fact. Malignant, energetic cryptospectral emissions, disseminating unholy discord within the domain of Omnicia, impact biological units of every order of divine creation. Explanation: those biological units that erroneously attribute their spiritual optimization to the divine signifier of the Emperor are also susceptible, despite their misguided beliefs to the contrary. Conclusion: the spread of negative phenomena will be halted by the cessation and purification of all biological units, for purity is inherent only to the machine. The Fabricator General was insightful enough to understand that actions based on such extreme views would threaten the region's security. He did not support the irrational attachment of imperial allies to organics, but he realized that a massive cleansing in allied worlds would be met with hostility. But after a series of unnatural epidemics, he decided to take extreme measures. Clang activated the secret void hangars near Metalica and released 3 arcs of extermination, which carried various forbidden archaeotech samples and were manned by Clang's most zealous archmagi. They headed straight for the world of St. Espina's Gift, ignoring Vox signals from the alarmed planetary authorities. The arcs of extermination positioned themselves in low orbit, then unleashed the full power of radiation macro-purge batteries upon the planet. In mere hours, St. Espina's Gift was nearly annihilated. Hive cities the size of mountains, already half-filled with billions of staggering plague zombies, were turned into glowing lakes of slag, and the planet's atmosphere filled with the swirling ash of billions of dead. It was a shocking act that drew condemnation from the frightened planetary governors. And yet, No one could deny that this decisively halted the spread of heresy on St. Espina's gift. Twice more, the arcs of extermination struck under Clang's orders. They scourged the northern continental part of Bartreus, a border world in the Alimax system, suffering from an invasion of plague psychers. They leveled one of the three complexes on the prison world of Unholu in the Byzantius system after rumors of mutations spread among the inmates. Despite such radical sterilization measures, ill omens and unnatural phenomena continued to spread. General Fabricator Clang realized that the situation was becoming even more threatening and issued additional edicts. First, astropathic pleas for help pierced the warp from the sanctum on Ferovi Juliem, and then the Legion of Escators, a procession of zealots of the cult Mechanicus. And entire maniples of Iron Skull's titans were loaded onto ships and headed to reinforce the garrisons of the Metalican gates. Orders were transmitted through data-laden laser beams and psychic translithography. All planetary garrisons were brought to combat readiness. All machine spirits were awakened, and all weapons pointed to the sky. General Fabricator's prognostic dates indicated the approach of something more nightmarish than mutation epidemics. At this stage, no measure was deemed excessive if it led to regaining control over any sector of the Bolis subsector. Metalica was not even concerned about losing a cardinal world considered sacred to the Imperium. But then a real storm broke loose. What approached Metalica was monstrous and unclean. It was the united force of the Lord Discordant Akara Zayed, acting as the right hand of Abaddon, and the plague fleet of Typhus the Traveller, first captain of the Death Guard. It is said that in the name of the warlord, Lord Zaid ordered Typhus to postpone his own bloody campaign and gather a mighty army in the name of the Despoiler. Typhus was irritated by the orders of the arrogant Zaid and under other circumstances would have attempted to eliminate him, but he nevertheless complied. Moreover, the entities of the warp whispered to the Traveller about Metalica, assuring them that the purity of the machine could overcome all warp infections, and of their efforts to cleanse worlds from the fertile blights of Grandfather Nurgle. Typhus saw an opportunity to shatter the faith of the haughty Metalicans by proving that the pious mechanisms were susceptible to the plague god's influence. Assembling an invasion fleet, he commanded his biologists to concoct a special strain of Nurgle's plague that could bring an end to the existence of the Metalican Empire by striking at its heart. It was named Nemesis Worm. Thanks to his own infamous reputation, Typhus gathered a massive invasion force with which he intended to strike at Metalica, though the followers of the Dark Gods rarely represented a united front. Thus, Typhus's great host was, in truth, a disparate coalition of warbands, each serving their own formidable champion, many of whom were as much bitter rivals as they were allies of convenience. Typhus himself brought with him countless victories of the Death Guard and warships of the Plague Fleet, spearheaded by his own terrifying flagship, the Terminus Est. To these were added billions of mutants, plague cultists, and infected Imperial Guardsmen, whose lives Typhus planned to expend as currency in the upcoming campaign. And the imperious Lord Zaid did not fight alone. He brought with him a fleet of renegade warships and a vast number of demonic engines and chaos knights, supported by several warbands of the Black Legion. Several renegade warbands joined Zayd's host. The dark apostle Zorkanat of the Word-Bearers and the cunning sorcerer of the Alpha Legion, Yaron Tile, also brought significant warbands to their banners, pledging to aid in fulfilling Abaddon's will. Then came the revolting titans of Legio Morbidus. Alongside them marched over a dozen houses of renegade knights, each adding even more power to the invasion. The attack began on three separate fronts in the Abelis subsector, targeting the Hramid, Alumax and Duralium systems. This transpired from the 855th to the 890th cycle in Metalican chronology. It was then that the Traveller arrived, and brought despair with him. For the defenders of the Hramid system, the absence of warnings from the neighbouring region came as a surprise. The reason for this was a series of bloody raids by Drukhari pirates, who had been ravaging the Hramid system for many cycles. These raids began with the mausoleum world of the Martyr's Rest. Here, the notorious Lilith Hesperax orchestrated a grand massacre, and the subsequent Xenos sought to surpass her atrocity. Marshal Tertian took command of operations against the Corsairs in Haramid and achieved a series of victories on the industrial world of Okharum, as well as among the bioluminescent fungal caves of Tartus. Unfortunately for the Imperial defenders, the same optimized disposition that helped them punish the Xenos left them in a precarious situation before the massive Chaos invasion. When Lord Traxoplasmax of the Death Guard discovered that his enemies were dangerously dispersed, the consequences of his attack were well visible under the crimson clouds of Oharion. Significant forces of the Savlar regiments had just finished clearing the southern districts of the city of Linkagar when warheads and infected landing ships rained down upon it. Several cycles earlier, the Drukhari had destroyed most of the turrets of the city's defense system, so Savlar Captain Glain Kerus realized that the surviving turrets could not prevent the massive landing of heretics, and ordered his soldiers to retreat through the northern district of Linkagar, destroying the bridges over the chemical canals as they went. Their intention was to retreat to a prepared position reinforced by Skitari cohorts. In a final act of malice, Drukhari spies killed Kerus's messengers, preventing them from informing the Mechanicum forces of his intentions. As a result, the maniples of the weapon servitors were targeted at the retreating Savlars as soon as they came within range. By the time the bloody and unforgivable mistake was realized, it was too late, as heretic forces had appeared on the flanks, and both Imperial armies were still exterminating each other, caught in crossfire lines. The gleaming desert hives of the Darrow outskirts also suffered. This world lay closest to the point where the Chaos fleets poured from the warp. The attacking forces were led by a band of Knights of the Blades of Terror, who broke through the ranks of the Imperial militia and breached the defences of several hives. Bloody battles, level after level, destroyed each city and orbital defence battery on the planet, while the Knights roamed the deserts, attacking Imperial supply convoys wherever they found them. Lord Traxoplasmax led his forces to the agri-world of Tortuza, with 7 Victoriums marching behind him. Such a powerful force was supposed to crush the defenders and Marshal Tortian himself. And yet, Traxoplasmax was a slow-paced commander, and according to his rival champions, unimaginative. He advanced from one network of caves to another in a relentless, grinding manner, which allowed Tortian to repeatedly outflank his troops and attack with small raids. Nevertheless, the Imperial troops could not defeat the advancing heretics. One counterattack failed after another, and the agri caverns filled with disfigured and writhing corpses. The war for Tortuza turned into a systematic extermination of the Loyalists. The second stage of the invasion was an attack by Plague Captain Aglosmos, the filthy Nalu Max. He was an unparalleled Void commander and one of Titus's chosen lieutenants. Opposing them stood the Cardian 727th Army Group under the command of Colonel Elena Brodsky. Eyewitness accounts from Colonel Brodsky's aides revealed that even with the enemy's numerical superiority, the worlds under her protection stood with icy composure. Colonel Brodsky organized an effective defense around the hive world of St. Bartolph's throne, repelling heretic uprisings and Death Guard reconnaissance parties. Her successes were impressive, but they were akin to the flame of a candle in a hurricane. The Titans of Legio Morbidus attacked the mining world of Geliotha, intending to seize its mineral wealth for their own interests. The militia forces retreated again and again, like insects before the strides of giants. With the help of the planet's mining collectives, the Imperial defenders destroyed several traitor Titans by filling surface workings with explosive charges and dropping the divine machines into craters. However, resistance could not last long. As defenders tried to retreat underground, the orbital plague ships used their teleportariums to deploy Terminator squads, plague lords, and deliver infectious substances into the mining shafts. Platoon by platoon, the defenders surrendered and fell on their knees before the wrath of Balquin Lathfir. Eventually, Geliotha fell in less than a cycle. An atomic explosion turned the city to steam along with Brodsky and half of her remaining forces. When 3 cycles later, fresh Victoriates engaged the defenders, they encountered radiation-weary and desperate wretches whose struggle was tragically short. Only one factor prevented the entire Alumax system from complete destruction. Its space lanes had long been ravaged by the Orc corsairs under Captain Drakbad Skalabust. Now, the green-skinned pirate turned his hordes against the invading plague ships. The Orcs managed to secure several victories over smaller bands of renegades before Agilosmus ambushed and defeated their fleet in the Toth Strait. Nonetheless, the unintentional distraction allowed the remnants of the Imperial defenders to retreat to the observation station Metalica Gamma 4, hidden at the very edge of the system, deep within the ever-changing Scythian gravity rifts. Periodic reports indicated that the Adeptus Astartes had responded to Colonel Brodsky's distress signal and conducted several raids against the invaders. However, in practical terms, Alumax had fallen. The attacking flotillas of Agilosmus and Traxoplasmax were very large, but a truly gigantic fleet descended upon Duralim, spearheaded personally by Typhus the Traveller and Lord Zahed. For several cycles, the void shimmered with the fire of batteries and bright coronas of explosions as the invaders waged one-sided battles against the space platforms of Duralim. Several fast Imperial frigates fled in search of safety in the Byzantius and Heror systems. Their captains intended to relay a warning back to the Metalica system. By the Emperor's blessing, 2 of them managed to escape. The Indomitable and Lady Grisenta plunged into the raging warp. Elsewhere, war consumed the inhabited worlds of the system. The ancient hive world of Erisplendis had long been preserved, accepted its magnificence while confining the lower social strata to the sprawling macro-ghettos among the underhives in their cities. Now, however, thanks to the 3 conjoined demon princes, known as the Kaislings, these very ghettos have become hotbeds of a walking plague. Billions of plague-ridden dead broke through the fortified gates into the splendid hives of Resplandis. The first 2 hives fell within a few cycles, while the defenders of the remaining were cut off inside besieged spires, forced to rely on supply drops from Valkyries. Matters were even graver on the neighbouring Magnifiery. One of the Blackstone fortress changed its course due to directed psychic bursts and machinations of Lord Zaid. Instead of Alexista, it arrived in the orbit of Magnifiery and deployed its weapon, ignoring the pleas of the loyal defenders. During the purge it conducted, billions of inhabitants perished as they were identified as extraneous biological life. Subsequently, the Black Legion and the Death Guard launched a massive assault. After this, the fortress dispatched 3 macro squadrons of Skitarii to the surface to support the surviving Astra Militarum soldiers in the radioactive war zone. It is unlikely that the crew of the fortress realized their error, as Plague Marines, Demon Engines and Chaos Knights are immune to radiation weapons. Magnifiery could already be considered lost by then, but the irony is that the fortress itself was also listed as lost, not destroyed by the Death Guard, but by the last functioning orbital battery, which remained under Loyalist control until the end. Typhus's invasion was focused on Metalica, but he fully understood the danger posed by the Lyrax system, as the Knights of House Raven coming to Metalica's aid could shift the balance of power against him. Hence, Zorkanat of the Word-Bearers and Yaran Thali of the Alpha Legion were dispatched there with their warbands. Their mission was to raid Imperial installations across the systems Eladak, Cyclos and Embor, to persuade the rulers of House Raven that their own system was under threat. Thus, the Knights would be less likely to send aid to their allies. At least that was Typhus's hope. Yet, even though his allies went to the Lyrax subsector, they did so for their own reasons. After infiltration, they held positions in the deep void, waiting for their plans to come to fruition. The glittering giant of Segmentum Ultima was in peril, and in the heart of the Metalican Empire, further steps were being planned. This task was personally handled by Heptus Rodeca McClung. Once he was an ordinary datasmith in the Metalican Legio Cybernetica. From the beginning he displayed more empathy towards Castellan robots than towards organic allies, as he admired the exalted purity of machines. He played a key role in the battle on Scarvine during the Purge of Lantiria, and in the recovery of the lost data of Amar Broska, after which he was promoted to a higher rank within the Metalican techno-priesthood. From that day, his ascent to the pinnacles of power was rapid. As Kleng climbed the ranks, he replaced more and more of his physical body with cybernetic augmentations. All priests of the Omnicia underwent similar processes, but Kleng went even further, using secret connections within the Legio Cybernetica to acquire enhancements whose usage bordered on techno-heresy. By the time he assumed the mantle of Fabricator General, his modified body was already the size of a super-heavy battle tank. He moved on a roaring grav platform, bristling with nests of mechadendrites and various servo-instruments, wreathed in the petrochemical emissions of his mechanized form. Additionally, Kleng had implanted within himself a network of extremely powerful cogitators whose arcane functions bordered on the forbidden technology of silica animus, the outlawed machine consciousness. These macrocogitators significantly expanded the mental capabilities of the Fabricator General, enabling him to calculate event probabilities with governmental proficiency. Kleng considered this a divine revelation of the Omnicia, believing that since he could interpret them, he was endowed with the true frequency of the machine. Kleng spent most of his personal time within the extensive web of infocanals and electro-impulsive arrays that filled his sanctum in the Forge of Excelsis. Through this info-spiritual interface, he could observe his domains and absorb all information from the noosphere, even directly imposing his will onto the minds of his subjects. He was virtually omnipotent, causing his followers to regard Kleng with the utmost reverence, seeing him as a conduit for the will of the Omnicia. However, this system had its flaw. Heptus Kleng genuinely believed that his revelations came directly from the machine god. So any deviation from his divine plan was to be considered an error in the divine code, to be either deleted or ignored as illogical and incorrect. Hence, Kleng struggled to accept the reality of any event that contradicted his calculations and predictions, and his own perfect mind became his flaw. But for some time, the logical purity of his mental fortress remained absolute, as no invader could breach the gates of Metalica. Nevertheless, things were not as they should have been. Sacred data flowed through his augmetic multicerebral brain from every corner of his domains, with rumors of a walking plague on Ferrovigulum, spread by those working on deciphering the visions of the astropath. Reports came of slave uprisings and electro-corruption of working servitors on the quarry world of Planetus. Manipulus after manipulus of Scitariae were required to suppress the largest of these outbreaks, and losses of tertiary and higher-grade organic units reached critical levels. Most alarming of all was a notable surge in the use of data for the banishment of supernatural forces across the system. Kleng was not foolish enough to personally interrogate any of the deviant machine spirits, lest their corruption taint his divine cognitive architecture. Yet, he pondered deeply on the nature of these techno-spiritual intrusions, for they should not have been possible. He was all too aware of the Dark Mechanicum's implementations of their forbidden machines and infernal data repositories. On the other hand, the Fabricator General's faith in the purity of Metalica's industrial production, its holy noosphere, and automatically illuminated engines was absolute. These were physical manifestations of the divine Omnicia. The very notion that any form of corruption could affect them was a heresy that Kleng was utterly unwilling to accept. Thus, the Fabricator General meditated in the heart of his forge shrine, trapped in a recursive logical cycle of his own creation, as he once again attempted to rationalize the variables he deemed as factual impossibility. Fixated on minutiae, he continued to deprioritize strategic communiques from other subsector divisions. Thus, cycles passed, and the Imperial hopes for swift retribution faded. End of part. But his chief adversary, Typhus, acted more decisively. From the 891st to the 940th cycle of Metalican chronology, the Allimax and Duralim systems fell. Chromid was drawn into a prolonged attritional war, and the Metalican gates were threatened. Many cycles passed before the Fabricator General reconciled the reality of the invasion with the security of his data. Imperial commanders on land and in the void were permitted to act at their discretion. Then Kleng issued an edict that commanded his soldiers to act with the same confidence as if being directed by the Omnissiah himself. Risking Metalica was not an option, and the security of the Radiar, Byzantius and Pharaoh systems became paramount. For the enemy had already demonstrated an ability to circumvent conventional warp routes. Kleng also commanded the concentration of Imperial military forces around Metalica and the neighbouring systems. Only in this manner could the enduring sanctity of the Forge world be ensured. As Kleng's edict spread through Vox communications and astropathic relays, Imperial forces found cohorts of Skitarii, battle servitors and Titans suddenly deploying and retreating in obedience to the Fabricator General's order. In response to requests for further clarification, they received only Kleng's repeated command. Uncertain of what to do, some regiments of the Astra Militarum withdrew alongside the Metalican Tagmata. Where withdrawal was impossible, the Imperial Guard remained with the Sisters of Battle and Space Marines to defend the worlds abandoned by the Metalicans. In the Cromid system, his edict caused the greatest stir and was perceived as outright betrayal. After Marshal Torsion and his elite Skitarii departed the fronts of Tortuzo, all glimmers of hope to halt the relentless advance of the Death Guard were extinguished. The roiling wave of plague engulfed the agricultural caverns of the planet. The defending regiments of Tortuzo were trapped and slaughtered, or afflicted by metaphysical ailments, and forced to swear fealty to Nurgle or die the most abhorrent death. Tortuzo did not perish alone, for as Lord Traxoplasmos struck blow after blow, the defenders managed to dispatch their final supply shipments. Brave Void captains pierced the Death Guard's blockade and delivered supplies to the Duroc Expanse and Martyr's Rest, but deprived of vital supplies and Metalican support, the defenders of these worlds had already perished. The planet Martyr's Rest was thoroughly excavated, as heretical sorcerers and trophy gatherers desecrated imperial mausoleums, claiming the bones of the deceased. The garrison and spire of the Duroc Expanse chose to surrender, but the traitorous knights showed no mercy, simply casting the prisoners into the desert, where they began to hunt them for sport. The indigenous inhabitants of the Death World Sabira joined forces with the surviving Imperial Guardsmen and began tormenting heretic warbands with raids. Soon, led by a group of Imperial officers and local clan leaders, these ragged survivors became an effective guerrilla army, repelling or annihilating one heretic gang after another. The defenders even established hidden air bases deep within the thickets of Sabira, their atmospheric fighters and bombers harrying any heretical spacecraft that ventured too close. Spurred by the audacity of these actions, and driven by his own desire to methodically crush all resistance, Lord Traxoplasmos halted his own advance. Cycle after cycle, he transferred an excessive number of his forces to the intensifying Siberian front. The Imperial defenders of Duralim were in a desperate situation even before they realized that the Metalicans had abandoned them. The combined efforts of Typhus and Lord Zaid led to the capture of numerous worlds. In the void, the heretical warships prowled in hunting packs, annihilating the last scattered Imperial forces one by one. Yet the Imperium had not completely forsaken the disparate Imperial Guardsmen, and the Battle Sisters still fought on the Duralim front. Securing and cleansing the astropathic relay on Cobalt, the Space Marines of the Order of Torturers activated its depleted choir and responded to distress signals from the Abulis system. Then their small ships plunged into the roiling warp, launching a counterattack from the Byzantius and Alumax systems. Reinforcements of Primaris Space Marines, aggressors and intercessors began to appear on various worlds. They struck demonic artillery on the planet Resplendi, then reinforced the 7th, 18th and 50th Vostroyan regiments, who were on the verge of breaking, before themselves rushing down into the hive, teeming with walking dead. Agroworld Sustus also received reinforcements from the Battle Brothers of the Ultramarines and the Raven Guard. They attacked the squads of demon engines that roamed the fields of the planet. The fields burned from horizon to horizon, while in the skies battle barges clashed with helldrakes. Such acts of defiance were numerous, yet the advance continued. Typhus led the assault on Fort Consacris on Magnafiria, where he put an end to the existence of the Cadian and Metalican forces. Typhus's agro-worlds incited mass uprisings on the penal planet Obleg, and vials of parasitic strains turned the illuminated aquifers of the world into deadly sources of contamination. Foul miasmas spread abundantly across the surface, even as brutal internecine conflict enveloped the subterranean complexes. Worse awaited the Imperial defenders ahead, for Lord Zaid led his Black Legion squads onto Sustus, where he unleashed new packs of Helldrakes. When most of Duralim was under control, Typhus turned his gaze to the Metalican gates. For many cycles, entities had been whispering to him, watching the swift build-up of forces in these systems. Initially, he awaited coordinated counterattacks, but then he realized that the enemies decided not to halt his invasion, but merely to cleanse the infected systems afterward. At these thoughts, Typhus grimly smiled. Corpse worshippers hide behind their redoubts. They think to outlast us as if Grandfather Nurgle's blessings were some pitiable physical ailment to avoid and deny. They underestimate Grandfather's generosity. Unbeknownst to anyone but his closest aides, Typhus conducted a summoning ritual and sacrificed the entire population of 7 nearby worlds. Since distance in real space means nothing to the entities of the warp, his call was answered by yet another formidable ally. Rotigus, the Rainfather, joined his war, and his presence triggered massive demonic incursions in the Pharaon and Brizantus systems. Conventional offensive operations would have provoked retaliatory fire from the Metalican arcs and the Charadon battle fleet. Instead, demons surged from portals right in the midst of the battlefield. They bypassed defensive bastions and avoided Metalican macro weapons, emerging from shadowed corners, making their way through the minds of psychers and broad fault lines in reality. The skies of Labyrinthum world turned a copper hue and rang with the thunderous roar of unearthly hunting horns. Blood geysers erupted from industrial sump pits, then coiled and transformed into nightmarish gates through which the demons of Khorne poured. On the feudal world of Felhelm, hidden pleasure cults sacrificed themselves in an orgiastic frenzy of self-destruction. The demons of Slaanesh broke into reality even before the last cultist stopped convulsing. The prison moon of Unhollow transformed over 9 cycles. Her stone citadels of punishment turned into labyrinths of flowing silver, through which the demons of Tzeentch hunted both prisoners and guards alike. And on the oceanic world of Fathom in the Phaero system, Rotigus, Rainmaker, led his own fertile legions to war. Fathom was a massive planet, covered from pole to pole by deep and turbulent oceans. It was a peculiar world. No explorer had ever managed to find the ocean floor, or even a solid core beneath the waves. Moreover, despite centuries of industrial-scale extraction using aqua-harvesting installations, the water level never fell. The waters of Fathom continued to teem with bioluminescent marine flora and fauna. Despite rampant pollution, the environmental exploitation, and the greedy attention of macro-trawler fleets, Fathom nourished the worlds and systems around it. Its generosity seemed endless over millennia. Perhaps unsurprisingly, such a place drew the weeping gaze of the Rainmaker. The invasion began with unprecedented downpours, oily and foul-smelling droplets falling on both drilling rigs and trawlers. Cycle after cycle, the rains fell. Their touch corroded metal, turned the seawater into algae-choked sludge, and sowed a dozen strains of parasitic, bacterial, and rapidly spreading diseases among the inhabitants. With no enemy to fight, the Skitarii and Elysian drop troop regiments scrambled in increasing desperation to find the source of the curse. Finally, they discovered a festering mass, congealing in the middle of the Northern Ocean. There gaped an impossibly huge maw, convulsing and spewing rot, from which legions of Nurgle emerged from the clumps of vile matter. By the time the epicenter of the threat was found, it was too late. Islands of flabby flesh broke off from the main mass, carrying phalanxes of plague demons southward with unnatural speed. Squadrons of Arco-mechs braved the roaring storms, dropping bombs on these grotesque islands. A few even managed to destroy some, but soon Howe 77 era was embroiled in a repulsive battle for survival against Rotigus and his personal guard of great unclean ones. while the aqua drilling installations defended against oceanic assaults. Battles raged in the void. Due to Lord Traxoplasmus's delay, 2 of the 3 systems of the Metalican gates were attacked. Radior largely remained untouched, but elsewhere waves of strikes crashed down in the form of heretical cultists, renegade bands, and raiding parties of the Death Guard. And Glosmus the Filthy led several squadrons of specially selected plague ships in the Fyro system. During his campaign of terror, the fortress world Fortros was bombarded from orbit, and a deep space monitoring station was destroyed amidst the battle. Despite the ceaseless pressure, the concentrated Metalican forces held firm. Their defensive networks were not formed from static fortifications alone.